All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of Bear's Guide to a 5. Today, we are looking at site, situation, and industry. Now, look, if you're watching this, that means you've probably played the industry game at this point, and you realize how chaotic manufacturing can be in the Industrial Revolution. And now we're going to take a look at industry in the modern day and how we figure out where we place industry, what's the best places to do it, and what are the effects of that. Now, hang tight because this is probably going to be a little bit longer of a video because it's just a lot of content to cover, but I'm going to try and run through as fast as I can. So the first question I want you to think about, pause the video and just think about it briefly. How does development of a country affect its industry and where we locate the products of industry? Because that's what we're thinking about. So go ahead, pause the video and think about it. All right, so you should be coming back now. And what we're going to analyze with this is as a country develops, we obviously establish more industry, but we don't just place it anywhere because that wouldn't make sense. We want to make sure that we're placing industry in specific places to save money, to make it efficient, and that's basically the two main points. So what we're going to look at first are situation factors. And you're like, oh my God, I remember situation. That's what's around. All the way back from chapter 1? Yeah, I know, we're all very excited. So there's 3 situation factors. The proximity to our inputs, the proximity to our markets, and the cost of transportation. And from this, we can figure out where to place industry. So the first type of industry we're going to talk about are bulk reducing industries. Bulk reducing industries are where the inputs weigh more than the outputs. We are bulk reducing. We are cutting down in weight with the finished product. Bulk reducing industries should always be placed close to their inputs. Let me give you an example, and you see it in the picture. If it takes 3 truckloads to make 1 truckload, and you want to keep costs of transportation down, you don't want to have to drive back and forth 3 times a long way to send 1 truckload a short distance to your market. You want to drive the 3 times back and forth a very short distance, and then a 1 long distance with your truck. Let's go in depth a little bit more on this. So, what are some examples? Everything to do with mining, winemaking, meat packing, lumber, all of these are examples of bulk reducing industries, right? And remember, they want to be near their inputs. So, for example, say we're using trees, lumber, and we're making paper, right? Trees are very large and heavy. A tree takes up a ton of space in a truck. And 1 tree only makes so much paper. So if I said I need 3 truckloads of trees to make 1 truckload of paper, I wouldn't want to drive 3 truckloads a really long distance with the heavy trees. I want to be close to the forest, cut down the trees, transport it a short distance, load up the 1 truck of paper, and then send it to the market. So what bulk reducing industries do is manipulate those situation factors, the how close to markets, how close to inputs, and the cost, to keep costs down. Because remember, our 3 situation factors are proximity to inputs, proximity to markets, and proximity to transportation. So if we have one industry that is bulk reducing and wants to be near its inputs because the inputs are really heavy and take up a lot of space, the opposite type of industry would be bulk gaining industry. It's the exact opposite. 1 truckload of something makes 3 truckloads of something. So you don't want to drive those 3 truckload distances a long way. You want to be closer to your market. So what does this look like? What is some type of product that takes up more space and more weight once it's made? We see this in the beer bottling industry or water bottle. All right, and then we particularly see bulk gaining industry in the furniture production. And I want to use this example because you guys are pretty familiar with desks. So I figure if I explain this to you, it would make a little more sense. If I have 1 truckload of wood, 1 truckload of plastic, and 1 truckload of metal, right? They're each 1 truck, but how many desks would that make? You know what I mean? So I have 1 truckload of each individual piece filling this truck to the brim, and now I have this final product that takes up more space, it weighs more, you can't fit the same amount of inputs into the same amount of trucks because desks obviously take up more space. So that's why it's bulk gaining, right? And you need more truckloads to get it to market. And that's why you would want to be closer to your markets to cut down on that transportation cost. Now, there are other situation factors as well. Bulk gaining industries and bulk reducing industries care about their inputs and outputs. But other types of industries might situate themselves differently. Now, one unique industry is a footloose industry. These industries are exempt from situation factors because they can move anywhere. Their industry literally does not have a transportation cost. But what could you think as an example of a footloose industry? I'll give you a second to figure it out. You can pause the video. All right, and we're coming back. And if you figured it out, call centers, guys. Anything to do with call centers, they can be placed anywhere because they don't have a tangible product. Now, all of this comes back to this theory we have to know called Weber's least cost theory, and simply states that the placement of an industry is determined by its location of raw materials, location of customers, and the transportation costs. It's very similar to von Thunen, right? So remember, if your inputs are heavy and take up lots of space and you have to use multiple truckloads to make one finished product, you want to be near your inputs. If you have a bulk gaining industry where it takes one truckload of something to make 3 truckloads of the final product, you want to be closer to your markets because that'll cut down on transportation costs. And then finally, if you don't have actual products that require inputs and outputs, you're a footloose industry and your situation factors don't matter. Now, what has made industry a lot cheaper and more efficient, especially when it comes to transportation costs? Let's talk about break of bulk points. So when something is transported, obviously we use different modes of transportation. We use trucks, we use ships, we use planes. And that doesn't mean that one type of transportation starts with something and finishes that transportation. So say we have our bulk reducing industry, we're close to our inputs, we make the final product, we put it on a truck, that truck drives all the way to a port, and then the back of that gets put onto a big ship which gets sent to another country, and then when that ship gets there, it gets transported onto a truck, and then the truck takes it to the store. Every time that product changed a mode of transportation, that's called a break of bulk point. Now today, break of bulk points are incredibly efficient thanks to shipping containers, which is what you see at the bottom of the screen here, or makes shipping faster through Bob's break of bulk points. We can take these shipping containers, easily put them on the back of a truck, throw them onto a ship, transport them wherever. Instead of pulling up with a truck, having to unload the truck, load the ship, we speed this up with shipping containers, and we can send a massive amount of products all around the world. Shipping containers have revolutionized industry transportation because we can send thousands of products at a pretty fast rate. They don't move that fast, but with how much they're carrying, it does carry a lot, and it travels with cars, technology, food, and refrigerated shipping containers. So it really is incredible what we can do, and it leads to this globalized trade that we live in, and we're going to talk more about this trade later on. So what you need to think about when it comes to situation factors, you have to describe how situation factors affect the location of industry. Understand the difference between bulk gaining, bulk reducing, and footloose industries. And then finally, how does break of bulk points increase industry productivity? All right, now we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to ask you a simple question. Which hotel would you stay the night in? If money wasn't an option and you were going on vacation, would you stay at the Sheraton for $125 a night or the Motel 6 for $75 a night? Most students and people agree that they'd probably stay at the Sheraton. But if I offered you maybe some free things, like I said, at the Motel 6 you get free Wi-Fi, free breakfast, free parking, and free transportation to all local theme parks, and at the Sheraton you had to pay for all that stuff, you might say you want to stay at the Motel 6. Now, what I'm talking to you here are about amenities, free stuff you get. And in industry, when people place their factories, they think about the same thing as you picking a hotel. They think about, what free stuff can I get? And the more free stuff they can get, the more inclined they'll be to place their factories there. And this is where we move to site factors. Now, if situation factors are what's around a place, site factors are what's at the place. So remember, situation is what's near, site is what is there. So there are three main site factors we need to talk about: land, labor, and capital. Land is our first one. So land is broken down into two parts. You want to have the best land for your factory. Well, the first part is cost, right? We want to keep costs as low as possible. It's just like Von Thunen. Industries want cheap land. This causes many industries to be placed in rural or suburban areas because it's too expensive to put a big factory in the middle of downtown. When we think about Amazon making new warehouses for shipping, they're not putting them in downtown Tampa, right? They're moving them out to the suburbs where they can buy up more land at a more reasonable price to put these giant industries. And then second are amenities. Just like when you go to the hotel and get free stuff, these industries want to get free stuff, and it's in the shape of infrastructure. Infrastructure looks like anything that makes the industry move. Are there roads there already? Is there electricity set up? Are ports there? And sometimes they talk to the people that own the land and offer to build those things, but we'll get into more of that later. The fact is, when we're looking for stuff, we want as much free stuff as possible along with the cheapest amount. But how does infrastructure relate to the placement of industry and LDCs, right? So take a moment, pause the video, figure out this question. How does infrastructure relate to the placement of industries and LDCs? Okay, you should be coming back. And when we think about LDCs or the developing world, we know that maybe they lack infrastructure, and this is where my point from earlier comes in. Lack of amenities, lack of infrastructure means starting industry in the developing world can be a huge problem. Luckily for them, or unlucky for them, big industries are willing to build those things, but there's always a trade-off. We'll talk more about it later. Then we get to types of jobs. There are two types of jobs when we think about labor. There's skilled labor and there's low-skilled labor. Skilled labor means that the people are educated, and industries that need skilled labor are probably going to place themselves in the developed world near big cities or major universities where you have those skilled people who they do have this employment pool to reach out to, and they'll be able to bring people in. Low-skilled workers, generally lower-paid workers, are just people they want to pay as little as possible because the jobs that they're doing don't require a lot of training, and they really don't see the reason to pay them all that well. If we want to break this down a little more, we would call it Fordist and post-Fordist jobs. We talk about Fordist because he started the factory line, right? Henry Ford, the guy behind the Ford Motor Company, he came up with the idea of instead of 8 people building a car start to finish, I could have 30 or 40 people doing the same exact job one stop at a time or one piece at a time and make a whole bunch more cars. And this is how the modern factory works. So Fordist jobs are those really easy ones that are super repetitive on a factory line. Post-Fordist ones are skilled labor that cost a little more. Let's go in detail. So as I said, Fordist jobs are low skill. Each person does one task over and over and over again. The jobs are very easy. Anybody can be trained to do them, so they don't make a lot of money. And you see the example here. Now on to post-Fordist jobs. Post-Fordist jobs are high-skill jobs. Instead of doing the same thing over and over again, post-Fordist jobs require someone to complete an entire task start to finish. These require education. This requires skill. They have to do a bunch of different jobs all at once, which generally means more pay. But now let's talk about labor-intensive industries. Just like when we talked about labor-intensive in agriculture, we're using this word again, but applying it to industry. Now, if in agriculture it meant labor from people working really hard, it means about the same in industry. And we see labor-intensive industries definitely in textiles. That's the people that make our clothes all around the world. For these industries, labor is the largest part of the cost. I mean, they employ thousands of people, and transportation doesn't matter, right? Transportation costs just don't matter because they have so many people employed. All right, so in labor-intensive industries, where should you place your industry to minimize the costs and maximize the profits? And remember, transportation is not an issue. All right, and if you thought about this, you would realize that we would place it in developing or high developing nations or the newly industrialized nations. Guys, this is why none of our clothes are made in the United States anymore. Because it's such a labor-intensive industry, it is cheaper to get the raw materials from one part of the planet, transport it to somewhere in East or Southeast Asia, have them make a bunch of clothes, ship it back to the United States, where then we will ship it all around the world to sell it. And that is cheaper and more affordable than making everything inside of the United States, right? So this is why industries use the site factor of labor, especially cheap labor in other countries, so they can produce all of this stuff so we can have cheaper goods. So as I mentioned, clothes are made in LDCs because the workers are paid so little, and then we ship them on the back of shipping, or in shipping containers on the back of really big boats. And that's why all of our clothes are made in other countries. I guarantee that 90% of what you own has probably never been made in the United States. Sold, but not made. Now we're on to our last part, money. Capital. Without money, you are not starting a business. And loans are easy to get in the developed world, but in LDCs, it's much more difficult. That's why we generally see these industries get loans from the developed world and then place them in the developing world. And in the developing world, they're trying to welcome that. The developing world's going, yeah, we'll take on the industry. We'll take these jobs that don't pay a lot of money. Because with the infrastructure that this industry is going to build, they're going to show up in the developing world and they're going to go, hey, let me build this factory here. I want to employ thousands of your people. I'll build roads. I'll build electricity. I'll build ports. This will supply homes for your population. This will increase your GDP per capita. This will bring up your HDI. I'm sure industries never think about HDI or the well-being of people, but that is the general train of thought that the people in the developing world are thinking. So they have to convince industries to bring that stuff, bring these industries, bring these manufacturing jobs to their developing country. Now, if the low wages aren't already lucrative enough for these giant manufacturers, the developing world competes with other developing nations to get the industry in their country. So how would they do that? Because they don't have money to offer them. They can't offer them anything except the cheap labor, except we move on to tax breaks. So what developing nations will do is that they'll say to an industry, hey, if you build your factory in our country and you hire all of these people in our country and you build the infrastructure in our country, you don't have to pay taxes, or you get a huge break on taxes for so many years, which means that big businesses get to save even more money and then keep prices even lower on their products so then we can buy them. So remember, the three site factors are land, labor, and capital. I know this was a lot to throw at you in this video, and I know it's almost 20 minutes long and it was a lot of stuff to cover. But it's critical that you understand the difference between situation and site factors. And to wrap this up, what to think about. You need to be able to identify the three site factors that people think about when placing industry. How does each site factor influence industry? Describe how site factors can help develop a country. And then finally, discuss how industries use situation and site factors to keep costs as low as possible. As always, after you watch this video, we're going to talk more in depth about it in class, and we're going to work through a couple examples so you don't have to worry about that. If you have any questions during any part of the video, make sure to write them down so we can address them in class. As always, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to get notifications when there's new videos so you can keep up in class. And as always, this is Bear's Guide to a 5.